Going to be recording this session this evening. This is the first of a three-part series, which we'll tell you about in a minute. But let's just go again over quickly the Zoom housekeeping. So if during the conversation you have any questions that come up, there's the Q&A box, and then there's also the chat screen, which can be found if you're on a laptop on the bottom of your Zoom dashboard. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in there. And let's see what else. Our order for today is we're going to have our introductions, and then our chief is going to give a presentation, and then we'll have a period where we'll unmute people, where we'll ask you to raise your hand, and we'll go over that when that's the time, and for proper Q&A directly with our chief. Okay, I will now turn this over to David Burnett, the president of the Marina Democratic Club. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome to everyone attending the Marina Democratic Club forum for this evening. The Marina Democratic Club was established in 2008. We are an association of progressive Democrats in the city of Marina. The club was formed primarily to give voice to people who have maybe felt underrepresented and have searched for ways to connect with the responsible parties in our city. Tonight's forum is, as Lisa indicated, the first of a three-part series. Tonight we'd like to welcome our Chief of Police for the city of Marina, and she's going to give a presentation of use of force policies and procedures, and maybe an overview of policing here in the city of Marina. We are anticipating two other forums later on this summer where we can discuss and debate suggestions for our city staff, our city administration, and for the police, and also to understand policing needs in the city and how people identify with the city's police department. I am the current president of the Marina Democratic Club. I was elected last July, and this July will be the end of my term, and we will be electing a new president. So with that, I'd like to now introduce our treasurer, Paula Plo, who is a founding member of the Marina Democratic Club and the treasurer of our club. Paula?
Thank you. So I wanted to give a little bit of context for why we're doing this series, and hopefully it's going to extend beyond the first three components having to do with policing. But tonight we're starting with policing, learning about our city's practices and policies, use of force, maybe going into some information about community oversight. But the fact is, truthfully, we all know that the injustices that we're witnessing today are not just in policing. There's a much broader current of racism that exists in our institutions, social and economic structures, and truthfully in our hearts and minds. And so right now, while we are taking some immediate steps to literally stop the bleeding, traveling down a road of reform will take education, listening skills, empathy, and most importantly, the appreciation of and respect for each other's humanity. So I first want to acknowledge some of our nation's history, that our nation was first built upon the theft of First Nation people's lands, natural resources, lives, culture, languages, and children. And it was also built upon the forced labor of enslaved African peoples who were stolen from their homes, robbed of their lives, culture, languages, and families. And it was built and is still being built now by the hard work of immigrants who at one time or another have been relegated to the status of second-class citizens, not looked upon necessarily with their complete humanity in the culture of white America. And out of white America's worst instincts and unjustified fears, Americans of Japanese descent were removed from their homes and businesses and were imprisoned. Women didn't get the vote in this country until 1920, and so have had a long history also of the second-class citizenship. We've yet to pass the ERA. So what I'm trying to say here is that in addition to the glories of our history, we also have a long history of a cultural and structural design that capitalized and has capitalized upon and benefited from the labors of peoples of color, while often subjugating and marginalizing them and robbing them, basically, of the right to live freely as who they are and reap the benefit of their own labor firsthand. So, you know, I hope we can reflect to fully comprehend that this has diminished us all. And then we can begin to move forward in earnest to repair the generations of injury and injustice. As a product of a multicultural family, myself, my family and myself have both benefited from white privilege and also have been assaulted and injured by white racists. So for me, the challenge is to look at the whole beast of racism. And while we begin to craft real policy changes and practices in policing that address the crisis that's immediately in front of us, we also take a broader look and accounting across all of our institutions and system, healthcare, criminal justice, education, and many, many more, with the very same scrutiny and dedication to change. 5 years ago, this club showed a documentary called White Like Me, Race, Racism, and White Privilege in America. And although it was well attended, we needed to do more. And now here we are. So I'm hoping we can reach inside ourselves to summon the substance of morality, the energy and ideas to commit to real change, not just platitudes. There's a play called, some of you might be familiar with it, For Colored Girls Who Commit Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. One of the main characters in this play is a woman who has been for years abused by her partner, taken advantage of, physically, emotionally abused, as her children were as well. And what he does is he continues to apologize when called out, but he never really changes. He just keeps doing the same things and apologizing for it. And so in this play, for about the 100th time, he does this again, and her response is to him, "One thing I don't need anymore is apologies. I got sorries greeting me at my front door, and you can keep yours, because I don't know what to do with them. They don't make me happy or bring the sun back." So this has got to be about more than just saying, "I'm sorry." We have to make real policy changes so that all people, not just white people, can breathe and live freely and prosper as is their unalienable right. So that's what this series is about. And I hope that each and every one of you will stay with us for this whole series, because we need to take this journey together. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. So we're getting some feedback in a minute, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. If everyone can please mute their mics, that would be great if you're not speaking. Okay, thank you. Oh, there we go. Okay, so as both Paula and David mentioned, this is a three-part series where we're going to be looking at policing within communities of color, specifically here in Marina. And we'll be looking at the end to hopefully craft some kind of a recommendation that the Marina Democratic Club can make towards the Marina City Council and for the Marina Police Department. But again, this is an inclusive conversation, and it is a recommendation that will ultimately be coming from the Marina Democratic Club. And this three-part series is going to be part of a much longer series that will occur throughout the year. This series will be really within the next three weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. And with that, I am very happy to introduce our guest speaker here, our Chief Tina Nieto, who is the Chief of Marina Police and actually has a lot of experience around community oversight. And so she's going to share with us a presentation, and then she and I will have a little bit of conversation, and then invite everyone to raise their hands and ask their questions. And again, there is the Q&A that you can ask as well. Chief Nieto, let's jump in, and can you just give us start off with a little bit of an oversight of your background?
Yeah, I know I was supposed to say any bullet points. I apologize. I got busy like usual. Hello, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to talk about this topic. It's a hard topic, but it's something that we need to talk about. But for those of you that don't know me, let me just give you a little bit of background. First of all, happy Juneteenth to everybody out there who celebrates. But 31 years ago today, on June 19th, 1989, I was sworn in as a police officer with the city of Los Angeles. So I've been in policing for 31 years, and that's what I majored in college also. So I was studying policing, you know, while I was on the 8-year, 4-year plan to go to get my 4-year degree. I always tell people. So I'd been studying policing for quite a while before I got my degree and joined the LAPD. With the LAPD, I rose through the ranks. LA is a large place, but the last 10 years of my career with LA, and I spent 28 and a half years with them before coming over and joining the Marina team. I was at what they call a command officer. So I commanded divisions, and actually I was in 4 different divisions with LA. And the divisions are literally 10 times the size of Marina, and being a divisional commander is like being the chief of police of a large city. I started out in Hollenbeck area, which was East Los Angeles. Predominantly Hispanic and minorities. Then I moved on to what they call Newton Division. Newton is in South Central. And for those who don't know, the city of LA, even though it's portrayed as South Central being predominantly African-American, it went through quite a few changes over the 28 years I was with LA, moving from predominantly African-American to a more of a mixed, it was immigrants that had come over. Newton was the poorest part of the city of Los Angeles, so any immigrant group that was coming over and you know, locating themselves in LA probably started out in Newt Division. So it was quite challenging. From there, I went over to what they call Olympic Division, which is the old Rampart Division, and it had taken part of Hollywood. The core of Olympic Division was Koreatown. So a lot of Asian populations, minorities that I dealt with, predominantly Korean, but it was a mix because it is the West Coast. From there, the last 2.5 years of my career, I was sent over to West LA, which is the furthest, I guess, division in LA on the west side. And it was also the richest division. This is what you see, you know, Beverly Hills is poor compared to the West LA side. It took a certain type of captain to get along with everybody, you know, and this is really where, you know, white privilege and stuff, it's West LA, because it was big money. Tech billionaires, so, you know, A-list celebrities. So it was quite different than all the other 3 divisions that I'd been with. So that's a little bit about myself coming over to Marina, but I'm really here to talk to you tonight about Marina's use of force policies and some of its policies and how we run things. And I've had a lot of questions, obviously, over the last month on what does Marina do or what does Marina don't do? What are they allowed to do? What do you think? So I'm going to share my screen with you. And there we go. So I need to exit a full screen here. So as chief of police, one of the things that California is, you know, like many of the states, California is just one of the many states, but California has been really the leader in policing issues and making changes as communities are looking to make changes. I've had questions about 8 can wait, and, you know, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But really the rest of the nation kind of follows where California goes with studying their policies. And as a part of being a chief of police in California, I'm also part of the California Police Chiefs Association. And we actually work with our legislators, you know, on recommendations and as they set policies and procedures for policing in the state of California. And I got to tell you that the chiefs right away took stance on what happened in Minneapolis, and you know, all the chiefs that I know and everybody that I've talked to, we all condemn, you know, excessive force and racially biased policing. But we also acknowledge that law enforcement is not immune from the impacts of racism in our country's shared past. And we believe that you have to really kind of set some level truths or we can't move forward with this issue. And that's why I joined you here today, to have those hard conversations and looking at what the community wants. Every day my conversations, you know, with the city are how can law enforcement improve. I have lots of conversations about that and how we can better connect with our communities. And quite honestly, how can we better listen and, you know, try to get people to trust us more, because there's things that we're doing wrong that we have distrust in our communities. And so what can we do to change that so there's more trust in our policing? And I gotta tell you, this conversation takes place throughout the city. This conversation takes place with the executive staff. That's all the directors in the city, with Lane Long being our city manager. You know, he's always questioning me about that. It includes my executive staff, that's myself and my two commanders, and how we set some of the policies that we do have options on in Marina, and talking to our elected officials. Right now, we don't have an oversight committee. We don't have a community police advisory board, you know, but maybe that's a direction that we could move towards, as long as it's a very systematic approach and we set goals. And you just can't do it overnight. You really have to, I guess, my master's is in leadership and mentoring. And so you really have to have a systematic approach in how you set these things up and not have knee-jerk reactions to, let's just create this committee and then nothing gets done and everything stays the same to make people happy. So I do believe in setting goals and being very strategic about that, if that's the decision the city wants to move in. So let's talk about the use of force policy. You know, since California really set the precedence with the passage of SB 230. Sorry, we passed that back in 2018. And really what it did is it created a statewide standard for use of force policies. Included in those requirements were requirements on de-escalation, rendering medical aid, dealing with vulnerable populations, an officer's duty to intercede when observing excessive force, reporting requirements, training, and much more. Actually, California leads the way in this model, and it's a model that I think that the rest of the nation is actually going to look to California to follow as policing changes. You know, one of the things that the Cal Chiefs, and I agree with, that we're looking to implement a statewide protest protocols, because the protocols are not the same throughout the state. And this is something that I think that we in law enforcement can do better, to have the same protocols, you know, across the entire state. We don't have control over the nation, but we certainly can make recommendations what happens here in California. So we need to make sure that we, you know, ensure the security, First Amendment rights for peaceful protesters. And we also give guidance to agencies on resolving, you know, conflicts that may happen during these protests. Look, we've all experienced the, you know, the rioting that we've seen in recent months, whether we were there because it's happened in some of our cities or we've just watched it through the news. They're still emotionally charged, and we're all aware of what's going on. So I'm a strong believer that we need tools, standardized protocols, and updated training to protect the public, and this should be implemented statewide, and also to limit unnecessary use of force. And so the Cal Chiefs, which I'm a part of, is also making this recommendation to our legislators as they look at as our laws might change. You know, the thing about it is the use of what we call less lethal force is an incredible value, or it's an option that police officers use across this country. But it's done differently everywhere. And so the California Chiefs and myself are saying, look, we're listening to our communities, you know, we're listening to the changes. What options do we have that we make it safer for everybody? It's very tragic of the things that have happened. I got to tell you, one of the things that happened very quickly is our governor banned training on the carotid hold with our California California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, POST for short. He banned the training on that as a force option for officers. As soon as the governor did that same day, Marina Police Department, meaning me, I removed carotid holds as a non-lethal use of force. And it can only be used in a deadly force situation. And people say, well, that's not banning it. Well, yeah, it really is. Because if you meet the criteria of a deadly force option, you could take a pencil and you could stick it in, you know, through someone's eye. I hate to be graphic, but you know, when it's a life or death situation, you can do whatever the law allows you to do, whatever to save your life or save the life of another. So one of the questions, again, getting back to that, is people ask about, well, what about chokeholds or the stuff we saw on the news? Well, in the state of California, those had been banned, or those weren't allowed and haven't been allowed for decades. The crowded hold was the last thing that we had on the books here in Marina. And so again, it's been removed from our books as an option for officers to use, except in an extreme deadly force situation. And in an extreme deadly force situation, somebody could even use a chokehold. That's just how the law is written.
Tina, I'm just going to interrupt you for a minute and kind of give us a little bit of a heads up. I actually just got word that Congressman Panetta will be joining us in about 5 minutes, and he wants to share a little bit about his Justice and Policing Act of 2020, which is coming before Congress next week. So I'm just going to kind of give you a heads up. This was unexpected. He heard about what we were doing, and even though he's in the middle of something else, he really wanted to come and join us.
That's fine. That's less talking that I have to do. So.
And he'll be with us for about 10 or 15 minutes.
I'm laughing. Very serious subject, but you know, nobody likes to talk even on Zoom.
Okay.
All right. Wait, where am I? So again, you know, another question I've gotten is about accountability and transparency. And I could tell you that I support the decertification of officers that fail to uphold their responsibilities or violate their oaths. I believe that the state should move towards some type of agency that can decertify officers so they can't get jobs. You know, the bad actors right now in the state of California, if you're fired from one job, you don't lose your certification and you can get hired by another agency. I don't think that should happen. I think I think we need to say what you get fired for, because there's sometimes, you know, you could get fired for something that the community may say that's not right. But we need to set a standard of what those things are, and that they never can be police officers again, because those kind of people should not be, you know, carrying guns and having a badge. They just should be taken out of police work. It makes it bad for all of us. But one of the things, like I was saying, but I do believe in due process for officers also. I'm a strong believer in due process, because I believe in due process for anybody. I believe there should be impartiality and justice for everybody involved, whether as an officer or whether as, you know, suspect getting arrested. I take an oath to the Constitution. All the officers take an oath to the Constitution of the state of California. So I'm a very strong believer. That's really kind of ingrained in my values. And that's part of my upbringing that I didn't talk about. You know, I was an officer in the U.S. Army. I was a munitions officer. So I believe in the Constitution and upholding its rights. I can tell you that the Cal Chiefs is collaborating with stakeholders to create a process for law enforcement and its community to move towards a process that might, you know, create decertification of officers. I think the most logical way to do that, Mr. Panetta just joined us.
Right, so
right.
can we stop the screen sharing? Hello, let me unmute you. Oh, no, you were able to undo yourself. And Tina, can we stop the screen sharing? Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I'm techie, I'm muting myself.
Great. Hello, Congressman Panetta, thank you so much for joining us. We have here on the screen, we have Marina Democratic Club President David Burnett. I'm Lisa Berkeley, I'm the Vice Chair or Vice President. We have Paula Pillow, who is the Democratic Club Treasurer, and we have Marina Police Chief Tina Nieto. And thank you so much for fitting us into your busy schedule.
No, you bet. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just here, and I knew I said 6:30, and then I got in a little early, so I figured I'd listen in a little bit. So,
all right, I'm going to get back to my presentation there. So I'm kidding.
Oh, no, that's all right. I'm sure it would be interesting, especially now. Trust me. No, thanks, Officer Nieto. It's good to, Chief, sorry. It's good to see you. And thanks to the Marina Democrats for holding this. I appreciate this. Obviously, not just because it's Juneteenth, but obviously during this time, this topic is one that we need to not just continue to talk about, not just continue to march about, but continue to act about. And I'm glad that you reached out to my office to have me talk about the actions that are going on in Congress, which I'll be happy to talk about, the Justice in Policing Act of 2020. And if that's okay, Vice Chair Berkeley, I know I can just probably go right into it if that's all right.
Please do.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you know, as you know, we had a hearing last week. It falls under criminal justice matters, fall under the Judiciary Committee and Chairman Nadler. And so we had a hearing last week. We had the markup on the bill where they basically debate the bill this week, and we will vote on the bill next Thursday. We travel back on Wednesday, and then we'll start votes on Thursday to vote on the Justice in Policing Act. And I appreciate you providing me this opportunity to kind of tell you about it. There's a lot in it. It's one hell of a bill under the leadership of Karen Bass, who chairs the Congressional Black Caucus. And she was also a great state legislator, but more importantly, right now in Congress, she's a real leader, especially when it comes to these issues on criminal justice. And so she took a lot of bills and put them all together and came up with the Justice in Policing Act, which I'll just kind of go through, if that's all right, the areas, and just stop me if you have any questions, or you can take a note and then ask me about them at the end of it as well. So there's a number of areas, and I'll just go straight down them. It bans chokeholds. It bans no-knock warrants in drug cases. It funds independent counsels for police misconduct investigations. It requires the reporting on certain use of force incidents. It requires deadly force only to be used as the last resort. It requires training of law enforcement officers on the duty to intervene. It requires uniformed officers to use body cameras. It conditions federal funds on states adopting the above federal standards. So obviously, let me just digress real quick. Obviously, a lot of the things I talk about deal mainly with federal law enforcement. However, as the chief will tell you, a lot of the funding that local agencies get is federal funding, burn jag grants and other types of grants. And so what this bill would say is, you need to consider and apply some of these things that we're talking about in order to receive those grants. So it will be incentives, financial incentives to act according to this law, and then they will get the finances that they normally do. So those are the incentives and the encouragement that is in this bill. It creates a national police misconduct registry. So it prevents officers who get fired for misconduct from going to other police agencies without them knowing of the previous conduct. It creates a national law enforcement accreditation system. It makes investments in public safety innovation grants. It bans racial profiling. It limits military donations to law enforcement. It gives subpoena power to the Department of Justice for pattern and practice investigations. So if there's certain patterns or certain practices that you're seeing by certain agencies, it provides funds to the state attorney general to then do an investigation based solely on those patterns and practices of misconduct that are alleged. It ends qualified immunity for law enforcement in civil misconduct cases, and it changes the standard in criminal cases to knowingly and recklessly. And lastly, it makes lynching a federal crime. So as I said, there's a lot in here. And you know, this is the bill that the Democrats in the House majority are putting forward and going to send to the Senate. Will this be the final version with all of these areas? I can't tell you that. I know that there will be negotiations that will go on. And I've heard that, not just from Karen Bass, I've heard that from Speaker Pelosi, and knowing that when the Senate has their version from Tim Scott from South Carolina, as well as the executive order that was put forward by the administration, kind of giving a detail of the areas where we can agree on. We do believe that looking at the Senate bill looking at the executive order, it's not enough, that there needs to be more teeth to it. And I think now more than ever is the time to act and to do something. Karen Bass was very positive on one of the Sunday shows in which she said there will be a bill on the president's desk that will come out of the, as I call it, the JIPA, the Justice in Policing Act, out of the JIPA. What that bill may be, we'll see. But that's what legislation is about. And as Karen said, you know, legislation is about compromise. Obviously, we won't compromise our values, but clearly there will be certain things within the Justice in Policing Act that will have negotiations. What those are, I have a sense, but we'll see. We'll see. And I'm sure the chief probably knows what areas they are too. But we wanted to put this out there to set a marker, to say this is what's important to us. This is a first step. This is what we should be acting on right now. Because let me tell you, now more than ever, it's the time to do it. I think you know that. I think you're feeling that. I think people, thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement, which has educated people and highlighted the inequalities that are not just in our criminal justice system. And it's not to say, and Chief Nieto will affirm this, it's not to say that people who work in the criminal justice system are racist. We don't say that. What I mean to say is when we say systemic racism, we're talking about that there are certain structural boundaries set up that the results end up being racist. I was a prosecutor for 20 years. My motives were not racist, but in looking at the numbers, the final numbers, and when you look at the stats, the fact is that you cannot refute the data, that it does treat populations of color differently than whites. And that's just the data speaking for itself, not the personal motives if anybody within the system or most people within the system, but it's the data speaking itself, telling us that. And I think you're seeing the general public accept that, which is big because you didn't back in 2014. You didn't back in 2014. You didn't see that back in 92. 2014 with the Eric Gardner case. You didn't see it back in 1992 with the Rodney King case. You didn't see it back in 1968 with the marches that took place then. But what you're seeing now is overwhelming support by the general public. And you're seeing that in the polling numbers where they accept the data and they realize that now is the time for change. And that's why I'm so proud of this bill. Because yes, it's big. In some areas, it doesn't go far enough. In some areas, we may see that it may go too far and we may negotiate. But the fact is that this is a good bill that addresses certain areas that we can deal with inequality and brutality and address these issues in a way that ensures that we stop basically having these types of murders and killings that we're being subjected to and seeing that, and certain populations are being subjected to, and we can change that. And I believe that we can. Now look, it's not going to be an overnight change. I think we know that. But I do believe that having this type of national law and these types of incentives will then obviously encourage and help the local police agencies make these changes. I believe we're lucky around here in a lot of ways that we have some very progressive police agencies. We have agencies that abided by President Obama's, or at least started to make those changes when it came to President Obama and his 21st century policing. I know Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office and Santa Cruz County Jim Hart basically started to do that and started to make these changes. This encourages that. A lot of this structure in JIPA is based on those 21st century changes and really goes pretty far in doing that. And so I just said, I really do believe that now is the time. And the last thing we want to do is have these deaths that we've been seeing, these murders that we've been seeing, be in vain. And I think that it's time that we can do this. And it's not just these murders, it's all the people that have marched before me, that have led in political office before me, that have marched on the streets before us. And the last thing you want to do is make all that work, all that marching, all those words in vain. And now we want to turn our deeds, or our words, into deeds. And I think we have the opportunity to do it. And so I hope that people continue to march peacefully, Continue to protest peacefully. Continue to get the word out there, because let me tell you, people are listening, and that allows us to act in Congress. And I believe that we're doing that with JIPA, and I think you're going to see legislation not only passed on Thursday, but you will see a legislation signed into a law sometime in the future, where it entails the Senate and this president. And if not, let me tell you, if not, we must hold those people accountable. We must hold the people who are not acting accountable, making sure that those people, those political leaders who aren't willing to make this type of change and do these types of actions and support these types of changes, we must hold them accountable. And it's up to us, it's up to Democratic committees to make sure, yes, that we continue to march, not just now, but in November, but not just here on the Central Coast, but I do believe right into the center of America. We have to make sure that people get out and vote and hold their electeds accountable for those who don't act. So I'm very proud of this bill. I think I'm absolutely honored to work with people like Karen Bass and Barbara Lee, people who have worked on a lot of these individual bills separately and put those forward. And to know that now is a good time, is the opportunity to pass these pieces of legislation in one bill. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of that action. But I'm also proud of the people who are out there protesting, like I said, making their voices heard, and people are listening. So thank you for being a part of that. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about JIPA. I know a lot of people haven't heard about this bill, or at least they don't know the intricacies of it. So I just wanted to really take advantage of this opportunity to kind of lay it out for you. Be happy to answer a few questions, and always know that if you do have any further questions on this, always feel free to get a hold of me. Feel free to get a hold of my office. Be more than happy to talk to you about this bill. Also, as it progresses, like I said, there are going to be changes. But as it progresses, please keep in contact with us. I'd be more than happy to do this type of Zoom call in the future. And then hopefully, when we get through this pandemic, hopefully see you in person as well. So thank you. Thank you again.
That's terrific. Thank you so much for your initiative. It's very, very exciting. We have a couple of questions already in the queue. So before we get to those, let me just say to everybody who is participating, you can either type your question in the Q&A box or the chat box. We're monitoring both of those. And then I will ask them to Rep. Panetta, sorry, or you can raise your hand, which is down in the participant section, and we will see your hands. But in the meantime, first I see David Burnett, our club president, with a question. Go ahead, David.
Hi, David.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Congressman Panetta. Jimmy, thank you for joining our meeting tonight. Just quickly, last week, the president signed an executive order mentioning a database. He didn't give a lot of specifics about it. I'm just wondering, is there room in the bill to make sure that we track police firings so that they don't get rehired, that they lose their certification?
That's exactly the purpose of the national database, the police misconduct registry. And that is actually something that I think you're going to see part of the final package. I say that because I have in front of me an excellent chart here that lists the three bills, or our bill, the Senate bill, and the executive order. And the one area where there's a check all across is that police misconduct registry. So I think that is the most popular one, and the one that people agree on. There's going to be other areas, there better be, that we're going to be pushing for, I can tell you that much. But that is one that we agree on. Tim Scott and the Senate agree on it. As I should say, the Republican majority in the Senate agree on it, and the president agrees on it. So yes, that will be in the final package.
All right. Good seeing you, Jimmy. Thanks for joining us tonight.
You bet, David. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Terrific, thank you. Okay, we have, I'm just going in order by how they appear on the screens. So we have questions from Kathleen Founds, who says, how likely is this bill to pass in both the House and Senate? Number one, and the second part of it is, how do you respond to calls to defund the police? Okay, it's a second question. Both from
no, understood. Look, I just like what Karen Bass said, and I agree with this. First of all, you got to be careful with slogans. I get the rallying cries. Okay, I understand that. but there's a responsibility on our part to not govern by slogan, but to govern by substance. And I do believe that when you say things like that, they can be provocative and they can be good. Don't get me wrong. It gets people's attention. It gets people to listen. But you got to listen and you have a follow-up conversation as to what exactly do you mean by that, okay? Now, if you just want to stop at just defund the police, that's something I disagree with. That's something I disagree with this, and you're going to see most Democratic lawmakers disagree with it. It's not about defunding police, because I guarantee you, there are populations of color. There are statistics. I was on the phone. I did a telephone town hall with the executive director and the president of the NAACP. And they will tell you, as well as statistics tell you, that populations of color don't want less police. They want more police. But I'm sorry, they don't want less police. They just want police that are less biased and less deadly, okay? And that's what this bill does, I believe. This bill makes police less biased and less deadly because of the training standards that it enforces in the database and so forth that I talked about. And so it's not necessarily about defunding the police, but I believe it is about reforming. It is about redefining the police. Police are over-relied upon. We do that to them. It's not just about them going after the bad guys. They're getting 911 calls for homelessness. They're getting 911 calls for addiction. They're getting 911 calls for mental health. They're over-relied on, they're overworked. Let's give them the opportunity to focus on the bad guys and actually provide funding for other areas in our government that then they can address the calls for mental health, addiction, and housing, those types of issues. So what I say, it's not just defund, it's refocus their efforts, refocus government's efforts on let them police, let the good police go after the bad guys, and let our organizations basically address those other areas that we don't have to constantly rely on the men and women in uniform, but let other agencies, other people who are trained in those areas of homelessness, mental health, and addiction to go after those people. So a long-winded answer, I know, I'm sorry, but like I said, it's not about the slogan, it needs to be about the substance. And it's our job in Congress to get past the slogans. And trust me, we do it on both sides. You know, you got build the wall, make America great, and you got some other slogans on the other side. And you got to get past that. And I get that when you say these words, it can stop the conversation. Don't stop the conversation. Continue to have the conversation about the substance behind what you mean. That's what it's about. That's what our democracy is about. That's what Congress is about. That's what I try to make it about. And so I try to have those conversations in order to talk about the substance and so that we can do what's right for people. Not just be about the problem. I got to be about the solution in my position. And to be about the solution, it's about substance.
Oh, thank you. I know you have a short period of time, and so we have just one more question and one more comment, and then a follow-up question. This is from Linda Bino, and she is the president of the Monterey Peninsula Democratic Club. And she actually makes a comment, and I think she'd like your response to it, where she says, systemic racism is about more than policing. It has a lot to do with all of the systems: legal, education, economic, housing opportunities, health, and representation. Can you speak to this, please?
You bet. I completely agree with her. And let me tell you, now more than ever, it's being highlighted. Yes, because of what we're seeing in these videos, okay? We understand that in the criminal justice system. But this pandemic, boy, this pandemic is highlighting the inequalities in our system. When it comes to education, when it comes to our health care, there's no doubt about that. We are seeing that. And that is something that we need to act upon. And we're trying to do that in Washington, D.C. Obviously, with the criminal justice, we have JIPA. But also when we talk about the CARES Act and the HEROES Act that we just passed, that the House of Representatives just passed, there are areas in there for education, for health care, especially for certain populations of color, making sure that our healthcare clinics are funded, not just big hospitals, but healthcare clinics, those that address certain low economic areas and certain populations of color. And so we in the House majority, the Democrats, have done that by making sure that letting it out there that in the bills that we've passed. Yes, the CARES Act provided a big amount of money, but we wanted more, and that's why we passed the HEROES Act that actually provides that funding for those areas where we saw the inequalities early on in this pandemic. And we know that more funding needed to be in those areas. Now, that's been the strategy with this pandemic, mind you. I mean, we can't solve, from the federal perspective, this strategy, since we're not seeing any sort of strategy out of this administration, what it's been left to is a federally funded, state mandated, locally executed. And I can tell you, as a U.S. representative, we've lived up to our part. We've voted and we've passed bills that fund the resources which you can use at the local level. Now, we got more work to do. There's no doubt about it, especially in these areas to address the inequality that we're seeing during this pandemic that are being highlighted that existed long before this pandemic. And so we are doing that with these absolutely huge stimulus packages, the biggest in the biggest ever in our country's history, the biggest stimulus package ever in the CARES Act, and which was $2.2 trillion, the HEROES Act, which we passed in the House and still needs to be negotiated with the Senate, but it was $3.3 trillion. So those are the types of goals that Democrats in Congress want, because we've seen it, we know it, we believe in those inequalities, and we want to address those inequalities through our job of making sure there's funding to make sure there's resources there to address those inequalities. So I agree with her wholeheartedly, but I would follow up by saying that Congress is acting to address those inequalities. We're going to be doing that on Monday, next Monday. Thursday, we have JIPA. Friday, we have just to give you a kind of a highlight as to what's coming up in Congress. Thursday, we have the Justice and Policing Act. Friday, we're voting on DC statehood. And then on Monday, we're going to vote to shore up the Affordable Care Act because we know how much that benefited so many populations of color, so many low economic neighborhoods in cities. And so we're going to vote to shore that up on Monday of next week. And then we're actually going to get to infrastructure, if you can believe that. Something we should have been done a long time ago. But that's just kind of give you a highlight. So I hope I answered your question. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I'm honored to continue to do the work in Congress to make sure that we address those areas with the federal funding that we've provided.
Thank you. That's terrific. We still have other questions, but I know that you're on a tight time limit, and so we're going to jump back. But two last things. What's the best way for people to stay in touch with you? And then how can we support JIPA?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Look, it's like I said, I think you have your representatives at the federal level, be it in the House of Representatives, me, or be it in the United States Senate, Kamala Harris and Dianne Feinstein. Kamala Harris was the author, one of the authors of the Senate bill. They know how important it is, but it's making sure, and look, this is for November too, okay? It's making sure that people that you know in other parts of the country, other parts of California, who may have representatives who aren't acting on this, who aren't taking these bold steps, have those friends of yours, those family members of theirs, have them call those local leaders, those senators, their Congress members, and let them know how important it is. That would be very important, that you make sure that they contact their local leaders, their senators, and let them know how important it is. And like I said, if they're not acting, then in November, hold them accountable. That's ultimately what it's going to come down to. I cannot stress that enough. It's making sure that they hold that accountable. I also want to make sure that you know how to get a hold of me. And I basically, the best way that you can do that is by calling me at 831-424-2229. Again, that's 831-424-2229. One of the things that I am very proud of is the response rate from my office. The best thing you can tell me is that I called your office and I got a response. The worst thing you can tell me is I called your office and I didn't get a response, but I want you to tell me that anyway, because I pride myself on that. And I hope that we can continue to do that going forward. So just want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for the work that Marina Democrats have done and will continue to do, especially now leading up to the 2020 election. So I appreciate your support, but more importantly, I appreciate your work and your activism going right into a very, 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 very important election.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for dropping in. Really, thank you, Jimmy. Have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of the evening. We really
Thank you.
appreciate
You
you
too. Happy
being here.
Father's Day to all the fathers out there, and happy Juneteenth, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Tina, Chief Nieto, we're
Hey,
going to
that
take
was
it
great.
away.
And joined us. I just want to comment on some of the things he said from a more practical standpoint and not as an elected. So one of the problems with this bill going forward, and the California chiefs have talked about it again, and one of the questions was asked, is it going to make it through the Senate? And that is a problem. So as Jimmy stated, the only one that they could agree on is the National Registry for the bad actors. Why? That's an easy one people can agree on. Some of the other ones that they talked about in it are going to be more contentious at the federal level for this bill. I really think the answer is to really look at California, because many of these things that he talked about that they're trying to do on the federal side of the house are already being done in the state of California, but they want to take it, nationally. And so, things that they talked about, that's already happening. 21st century policing. I'm very familiar with that. I was the president of the Hispanic Commander Officers Association on a national level. So I still travel to Washington to sit on some of these panels, which, coming from Marina goes, we didn't even know Marina went there, but our city has supported that to follow these things. And in some of these papers, you'll find that I was part of these work committees to help put together some of these things. So when he talked about that, the 8 pillars with Obama's legislation in the state of California, we actually adopted most of the things that Obama had talked about on the white paper that came out of there. Marina has body cams. That was one of the first things that I did when I came over as the chief, was to move forward the body cam program and finally adopt them. It had been sitting, Marina had it, but they hadn't moved forward with it. So I just pushed it along its way with support of the electos. National accreditation. I think that on a national side, I think that's a good idea. I don't think it's going to come along easy though. I think the answer is, again, looking at our own accreditation here in the state of California and working with Post, giving Post the power to decertify officers that are bad actors. Because here's the thing, we could still have a national registry that says these people were fired, but unless you change your local rules saying you can't hire them as police officer, all it is a name on a registry. So unless they write it that they can't get certified in any other state, it won't happen even if we do it at federal level. Now, I'm not discouraging them. That'd be great if they could get this passed on a federal level. But what I'm saying, if you want this stuff done a little more quickly, I think it really is, you should move towards working towards our state legislators to get some of these changes into place that the community's talking about. Racial profiling, that's already done here in the state of California. The law was passed several years ago that all agencies have to collect this data on racial profiling, and depending on the size of the agency is when it kicks in for the agency. So the large agencies are already mandated to do that by state law. And Marina, for example, will be mandated to do it by 2022. And our data collection system is changing so we can do that. I'm very familiar with racial profiling. Again, getting back into my background, when I was a lieutenant with the Los Angeles Police Department, I actually worked on the consent decree reforms. I was part of I have a unique past. I'm a police auditor. I ran the teams that ran the audits for the entire LAPD. We worked with the federal monitor. People think that the federal monitor did all these reports. No, it was actually internal teams within the LAPD following guidelines from the federal monitor that measured all this stuff and looked at all these things. And I think that's a good thing. I think police auditing is a good thing. But what I can tell the communities is this stuff costs money. You can't just say, hey, go do this, chief. There's a cost to making these changes. That's why I support change, but to do it systematically and really look at what is the cost to the community. You know, somebody asked about defunding the police. I agree with the congressman on that. It's something somebody is shouting at. But when you look at, you know, the communities that want the police there, that there's study after study saying it is the African American communities that want police there, but they just don't want police to do the bad things that have been happening to the community. If you get rid of policing, and this is Tina being Tina. If you get rid of the policing, the only people that are going to have police are going to be rich people. Why? They're going to hire private security. And the people that are going to be left out, like always, are going to be the middle class and the economically impoverished people. And there's very good intentions behind some of these things. I get it. But again, I'm very, very practical. If you know me personally, you can say, yeah, Tina tells you the truth and she's practical. But I'm very respectful about it and how I'll have that conversation with you. So I don't support defunding the police. What I do support is looking at our programs. I can tell you, you know, police reform in itself will not resolve the socioeconomic, racial divides in our country. That's a deeper, deeper discussion like the congressman talked about. And, you know, with the police, why the police do everything is because nobody else wanted to do it, to do the job. When it came to deal with mental illness, I don't want to deal with mental illness. I don't want my police officers to deal with mental illness, but nobody else was doing it because we had defunded everything. And so police got stuck with it. Homelessness. Homelessness is not a police problem. It's a society problem. And so, you know, if you say, well, I'm just going to defund and give it to homeless, I get it. Reallocate resources, but do it in a systematic way. And just saying, I'm going to get them motel rooms is not the answer, folks, because there's a lot of other issues that come with homelessness. And, you know, we got to find answers that stick, not these that feels good and now we can go ignore it. You know, there's a myriad. I could go on and on about things that police handle that we should not be the ones handling this. You know, this really is going to take a holistic approach of the entire community. And Jimmy talked about it. It's about education, mental services, substance abuse treatments, right, that lead to a lot of these crimes, rehabilitation and reentry services, housing, vocational opportunities. These all have to be adopted in tandem. I'm going to give you an example. When we did all these early releases about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, crime spiked up in communities. Why? Because there wasn't services for folks getting out of jail to get a job, for reentry. They just said, here you go. You're free. Good luck. Well, that's not the answer. You know, when people have to put food on their table, they're going to commit crime if they have to go steal stuff to put food on their table. Or if they were drug addicts, it's real easy for people who have addictions to fall back in there if there's no support system in place for those folks. And that's what we did. So we can't, I'm going to change however the community wants. I just don't want the community to knee jerk in its reaction and say, just do this. Because it just gets harder and harder for policing. It puts a lot of stress. I'm going to skip just the 8 can wait, if that's okay. I had other stuff, but let me talk about 8 that can wait, because a lot of people ask questions about that. I'm going to bring it up. So for those who, let me answer one of the questions. Somebody asked about cahoots in the chat. If we
question, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. The question is Marina, Monterey County, or the state considering programs that some nonviolent 911 calls can be rerouted to programs like a 31-year-old Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon?
Okay, so let me tell you something about Cahoots. Cahoots is not something that just started in Oregon. It's been around for a long time. They just didn't call it Cahoots. You'll hear it called different names in different communities. It's about wraparound services, collaborative teams that go out and deal with these issues. And it's not actually Cahoots what they do because of the wraparound services. They may be able to handle stuff on the phone, but when they go out in a team. The mental health people don't go out without the police. What happens is they go out together in case there is an incident with the person who's in distress, dealing with whatever mental illness is happening to them at that time and place when they make that 911 call. So it's not just behavioral scientists or psychologists that are going out. It's wraparound teams, and these have been around for a long time. And Marina, we have a semblance of wraparound teams. We work with our nonprofits, but again, it gets back to funding, right? So when they start cutting things, one of the first things they start cutting is mental health. Even with their nonprofits, they're like, well, we won't have a, you know, person available for this one, for this team, or we're only available, you know, between the hours of, you know, 8 to 12, you know, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'm not saying it's the nonprofits, because people are trying to help. It gets back again to the funding. We can do all these things, but it takes funding, and it takes the will of the people to make sure that it gets done. And it's done in conjunction with the police. The most successful programs out there, it's done in conjunction. Why? Because you would never send a psychologist at 3 in the morning to somebody who's having a psychotic break by themselves. The reason you have the psychologist there is so they can help that person, because they're trained to deal with that person that's going through a crisis, right? And the police are there as last resort if they have to do what they call a 5150 hold out of the wealth and institution hold, and that's somebody who can't care for themselves or is a danger to themselves, a danger to others, and they place them under observation for 72 hours to make some determination about that person. So I support those kind of programs. I wish we had more of them in our community, but you can't do it by defunding the police. You can't say I'm going to just give it to the psychologist and then take it away from the police in that respect. Again, it has to be very systematic how you do it. And then talking about budgets, right? When you look at who behavioral sciences or behavioral services, that's usually out of county. So is the city of Marina willing to take their money and give it to county and let county use that money and hope that they do the best job with it? I don't know if they are willing to do that. Maybe they are, but you know, that's why the electeds get to decide on what we do with our money. So the 8 can't wait. I'm going to go back to the slides. Let me share this real quick. Let me find it. Maybe I'm not going to share it. Hold on. Where's my screen?
Sorry to have thrown you off, Tina. It was a very last minute and
Oh,
unexpected thing with the
I'm
Congressman.
flexible. Cheryl may divorce me though, so.
Sorry, Cheryl.
Domestic partner. She says, you're always on Zoom meetings. I go, well, that's my job.
Well, we appreciate it, and we appreciate you switching into more of your like educator mode, and because you have this is my personal bias, as I do know you personally, and you have such an excellent heart. So it's good to have that heart come through in your care with the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Again, there's people that are just joining us. I have a very strong education background too. I've been a trainer. You know, I first started with the military, and then with the police, with policing, I got involved in training in these very advanced leadership schools that really look at why we do the things we do. So I've got a strong background. I like education and teaching people. I think everything's a teachable moment. I make my staff crazy by saying, okay, let's talk about this. It's a teachable moment. What can we do better the next time? So, but let's talk about 8 can't wait. And this is something that's coming out of, you know, this is a national push coming out of the Campaign Zero that's saying we need to do all of these things. And one of the things that I keep hearing people saying, well, this reduces use of force by 72%. Yeah, the data might show that if you haven't adopted any of these things here. So if we said in the state of California, we're gonna do every single one of these things, and we already do many of these things, it's not going to be a 72% reduction because we're already doing all these things. So again, from the background, an auditor's background, you know, data can be, I disagree with Congressman Panetta. You can interpret data different ways depending on how you spin it. But it is numbers, but you can look at those numbers in different ways and you know, interpret them in different ways. So, so with the 8 can't wait, there's 8 things that's coming out of this Campaign Zero that they're talking about on the national level. One is the ban chokeholds and strangleholds. And I've talked about that before. That was already banned in California. What we did allow though is we allowed what is called a carotid control hold. And what you saw on TV was not a carotid control hold, but a carotid control hold does cut off the flow of blood to the brain. And so there are people saying we should not use anything like this that, you know, cuts off the flow of blood to the brain. And like I told you earlier, so the minute the governor said, hey, I'm not going to allow California to, you know, teach this anymore in post, Marina banned it, or we didn't ban it. We classified it as deadly force and really kind of banned it. And we changed our policy and took it out as a non-lethal force option. So it's not in our policy anymore. And then we went and we met with every single officer on our department so they understood that you cannot use this unless it's a deadly force situation. And before, you know, because I have to get cooperation with the officers, so even something like this, I made sure to meet with my POA board, which is the police union. You know, I called the city manager so he could let our electeds know that we were going to do this, and we pulled the trigger. You know, I can make decisions as the chief, and I can just do things, but is that the right way to do it? I like to do it where it's a collaborative type of process, that I get people on board, or at least they have an understanding of why we're doing something, whether they agree with it or disagree with, but they understand the why piece of it. Again, I think that's probably part of, you know, just my teaching makeup. Another thing that we did, because I saw, and this is a personal problem that I saw with the department, is how we handle people that we had to hobble. And hobbling is when you see them tie them up, and you can get what they call positional asphyxiation. And many agencies have changed their policies because people have died because they've been left on the stomach. In fact, what you saw in Minneapolis was a combination of him, you know, the officer putting his knee on the neck for 8.5 minutes, and the position that Mr. Floyd was in. And if somebody is, it puts pressure so you can't breathe and stuff, and it's called positional asphyxiation, and it can lead to death. And so we don't allow it. So we had changed that in the state of California years ago, because the policy is you got to flip. If you're going to do something, you got to flip them. But there's also problems with that. So one of the things I did back in January before this all happened is I authorized a RAP system. And because we've been in, you know, I would have presented it to council, but we've been under this, you know, Zoom meetings and a whole bunch of other stuff happened in our nation that's taken up my time. But what you see on the screen basically is the RAP system. It can be employed by 2 to 4 officers. You kind of just wrap somebody up like a burrito, and they can't fight with you, and it ends anything. And Mr. Floyd, if they had had this system, it wouldn't have happened with them. Could have still, because that officer was just criminal in not flipping Mr. Floyd over and getting him into a different position. But when we have somebody that's combative or is resisting, we can stick them into this system, and they can't move. The entire department has been trained on it, including me. I made everybody do it, even my commanders. And we got wrapped up in it so we could fill on it. And also, the other thing is that it makes it easier to lift somebody who's in the system, to put him into the police car. There's actually handles on it. So it also decreases injuries both to the police officers and also to the person that's under arrest or in custody. And so the city of Marina, we carry these. All our patrol officers have this in their trunk. And the county sheriffs, when they go downtown to Salinas, to the county to be booked, the Salinas sheriffs, are not the Salinas sheriffs, but the Monterey County sheriffs are also trained in this device. So they know how to take the suspect out or the person under arrest out and remove them from this restraint in order to book them properly. So this is something that we use in the city of Marina that most people don't even know that we have. And not all cities in the peninsula have it. It can't wait. They asked officers to de-escalate situations where, when possible, through communication, blah, blah, blah. Well, in the state of California, SB 320 already requires officers de-escalate techniques. This law back in 2018 changed, and then we already have to do that. So we minimize any uses of force. And so if we use de-escalation, you know, we rise or bring it down. So hopefully it will be the less amount of force that you absolutely have to use. And all officers have to be trained in it in the state of California. And, you know, Marina has taken the step forward. Marina has people on the crisis intervention team. And Marina has about half of its department. About half of us are trained on that. But I've already mandated that I'm going to get everybody trained on that, because it's almost like advanced de-escalation. That's not required anywhere, and nor will be required on the federal level. But it's good tools. Why wouldn't we do this? Again, whenever you train somebody, though, it costs money. This doesn't happen overnight. I can't just have them watch a video and have them de-escalate. So this is stuff that they have to go to training, and it's one-on-one because they work with, you know, trained psychologists and stuff. And people that deal with this, that deal with mental illness, and are crisis intervention trainers that have to have a lot of degrees to be able to train officers. But we're going to be mandating all officers once COVID lifts to get everybody on the department trained in this, except for myself. The only people I have to de-escalate is my secretary, who gets mad at me once in a while. So require warning before shooting. Look, officers are already trained to communicate before firing their firearm in an effort to gain compliance. The law already says it's not a shall, but you should give warnings on any type of force to try to de-escalate it before you have to do it. But there are situations, when you're a police officer, things happen very rapidly, and there's situations where you don't have the luxury to do that. And the force escalates pretty quickly, even if you're trying all the things. But the law says when feasible, a police officer shall, prior to the use of force, try to identify them a police officer, tell them, hey, the thing I'm going to use could cause death, and please comply, ma'am or sir. So the officers have to already do this. So we do, if you say a shall, if we make the law where if there's a situation that goes A to Z, like just boom, like that, and you say, well, the officer didn't do this. If you make this a shall in the law, then it's just going to cost cities money and lawsuits. Will it save lives? I don't know, because we already do this when we can. But again, that's up to the community. So for the most part, we already comply with that. Exhaust all alternatives before shooting. This is a more difficult one that 8 Can't Wait saying to do that, because what happens is that if you make a rule that says exhaust all alternatives, they're calling it a continuum of use. Well, sometimes things go from A to Z, and you can't go A, B, C, D, E, F. And if you cause that requirement for people to do that, it makes it very difficult for officers to do their jobs in some instances. Look, officers are trained to use reasonable force based on objective assessment of what's going on. But if you put this criteria that you're going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? It goes on and on. That's going to it's going to be tough to do police work. And it's also going to create a lot of liability for the cities. Again, that's up to our legislators and stuff about how much liability they want to put on cities if they adopt a rule that's so hard pressed that you have to do A, B, C, D, E, and F. So I don't know what the answer is, but what I can tell you is that we're trained to try to de-escalate stuff, to use whatever you reasonably can before you take it to the next level, and to bring stuff down. But again, there are circumstances that you may walk into, and you've already walked into people shooting at you, right? Are you going to say, please drop the gun and quit shooting at me? Let me try to tase you first before you shoot me. There's just some things it's on, and then there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking that can go on with a rule this restrictive. Duty to intervene. That's already written into California law, and it's already written into our policy. SB 230 again made a requirement for all California police officers to intercede when they're observing another officer using force that is clearly beyond which is necessary. And you can be fired or you can be criminally charged if you violate this. So that's already written in. So in the state of California, I don't know, every agency in the state of California got questions from like a bunch of people say, do you have a duty to intervene? And yeah, we do, because it's state law. So everybody does in the state of California. On a national level, they should adopt that on a national level if it's not with all states. I believe we take an oath again to the Constitution, and I think all officers would have to have a duty to intervene or intercede if they see this type of conduct happening, this type of misconduct or criminal conduct taking place, that their partner officer or another officer is using force that is criminal in nature. Shooting at moving vehicles. Again, if you just say, I'm banning it, it makes it real difficult because the law it's written now is that you pretty much can't shoot at moving vehicles. In our policy, and it's many policies adopted. This changed about 15 years ago in the state of California. So people coming at that, maybe at a national level, they need to follow what state of California does. But you know, the reason why it's not written that it's just completely banned is because the only time that you can shoot at a vehicle is if there's no other reasonable means available to avert the threat of the vehicle. And the threat of the vehicle can't be the officer jumping out in front of the car. It literally has to be a situation like they're in an alley and the alley is, you know, 6.5 feet wide and the car is 6 feet wide. And you know what I mean? The officer can't jump out of the way. It's got to be, it's that strict of a criteria to be able to shoot at a moving vehicle. So it's pretty much, when they do it, it's pretty rare now in California. It does happen, but you have to show that it truly is a deadly force. And again, last year, with the law changes, the deadly force, the justification for deadly force, the level was raised to here for officers as far as when they can use it or can't use it. The requirement for comprehensive use of force continuum. So, and this is really the use of force reporting. So this criteria is already followed. This standard is already followed in the state of California. Marina's policy is that if any officer uses force, they have to report it, and a supervisor has to review it. Here's the problems. I think there should be on a state level, on a national level, there should be kind of like protocols and how that's done. I'm going to give you Marina as an example where we're trying to do a little bit better. We didn't have a standardized use of force reporting method when I came as a chief. And we've been working on it actually for the last year and a half. And back in January, when we finally got something that we, because again, you had to work with your POA and you got to work with everybody. Is this best practices? Is this what everybody else is doing? You know, how are they doing it? How can we do it with Marina? Because I didn't ask for any more money I need a system to track this. And in many big cities and other cities, they spend thousands and thousands of dollars with computer systems that will do that. We had to come up with a system that we could capture the data that didn't cost us any more than what the budget already had. So back in January, we finally came up with a new policy. We trained everybody back, the supervisors on it in February and March. And back in January, stepping back, so from January 2020 on, we now capture all our uses of force. There is a protocol to how the review is done, all the way up to the chief's level, to make sure that that use of force is follows all the standards that I've already talked about. So that already happens here in the city of Marina. And finally, the last, oh wait, I'm sorry. That covers the protocol. So let me back up. So what I just talked about is this one, reporting for use of force. Let me get back to comprehensive use of force continuum, what they're asking about, number 7. So we follow that too. So, but in it, you know, peace officer may use what they call objectively reasonable force to effect an arrest, prevent escape, or overcome resistance. The policy numbers is where you can find it in the Marina policies. And it also outlines a whole list of considerations when deciding what level of force to be used based on the circumstances presented. That's also in our policy. Now, one of the other things for officers, you know, because the training questions come up, and I'm going to end this. So Marina uses Lexipol. Lexipol is a system that helps smaller agencies with their policy manuals. It used to be that Marina had to hire a full-time person, and their policies were already behind. To update policies as the law changed. And in police work, it's very rapid. Legislation is changing constantly. The laws change at least once a year, and more rapidly, just like when the governor banned, you know, post-using stuff. So this stuff is rapidly changing. But we in the city of Marina use this company called Lexipol. And it's Lexipol if you want to Google it and look it up. And they are a company that just follows all the legal changes. And what they do is they send your manual updates to you, and you know, you read them to make sure they're in compliance, because cities may have some tweaks. The legal stuff they can't tweak, but there may be some tweaks to you know, the equipment they use, the type of weapons they have, you know, the uniforms, the color of the uniforms. So the cities get it, and I have a person that gets it, and we review it to make sure that it meets the Marina standards. And then all the officers get the updates. So therefore, they have to do training on this stuff and read all these policies. And then Lexipol does these, what they call updates. So they do these scenario-based type of questions and answers that everybody has to do on the department every month. And there's about 30 scenarios that you have to go through every month just on the computer system to stay updated, to stay current on what's going on with the law is and stuff like that, including the chief. I think I'm about behind for about 2 months, and I need to catch up because I have somebody who sends me saying, Chief, you're behind on this, and you get you know, and then I'm also telling them, look, so-and-so's behind on their stuff. They need to get caught up on all their training. So that's some of the stuff that we do already here in Marina. I'm going to show you one other slide. Let me find a real.
So, Tina, I know that we took a little bit more time with the congressman, and I don't want to rush anything because I really want to have everyone to hear what you're saying. Are you open? There's one person with a hand raised. How do you want to proceed? Because I know that we want to also touch a little bit on the transformational leadership program that's going on and about community engagement a little bit, but I don't want to add another layer of rush.
Okay, so one thing I just want to say about the Marina budget is the city of Marina runs very lean. And if you look at the Monterey Herald from a couple of days ago, they did a chart. I think it was the Herald or the Weekly. I can't remember which one, but it's one of them. They did a chart that showed all the cities in the area based on their population and the amount of the police budget. And I can tell you that Marina is 26% of the budget. You know, Seaside, which you're hearing about budget cuts a lot, they're at 39% of the budget for their city. So you can take a look at it and see that Marina's not like crazy. Like the police department's not getting crazy money. Maybe $1 is crazy to some people. I'm not throwing value there, but you can look at the comparison, and you can look at the small numbers that the police, are residents. You can look to see the ratio of officers to your residents. Again, it's numbers though, can be interpreted different ways. I'll give you an example. Monterey, you might say, wow, they have a lot of officers, but you have to remember cities like Monterey have a big tourist influx, right? They're not residents, but they come into the city. So there's a lot of factors when you're looking at what your staffing ratio is for police officers. Now, the city of Marina, and one of its strategic goals was to look at staffing both in our fire and police department. Our fire department's looking at a staffing modeling right now. The police department was supposed to start in the next fiscal year. That's been put on hold though with everything going on to look at our staffing. Because most likely, my guess is they're going to come back and say you probably don't have enough officers, which would cost more money. But with all the stuff going on, we're just trying to keep it status quo to make the changes we can to deal with what we're dealing with. What were the questions, Lisa? And I'll try to get to some of them, and then I can talk about the transformational change project real quick.
Okay, hold on. We see Brian McCarthy. I assume that's who Brian is. Okay, Brian, if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Democratic Club, for hosting, and thank you, Chief, for being here. I'm guessing you're not getting overtime for being here, so it's really worth commending your dedication. And thanks, to your family for sharing you with us as well. One thing I haven't really heard too much talked about tonight, other than a brief mention by the Chief, is the police unions. In the national debate, the discussion is that these unions are absolutely essential in the discussion. I think in an ideal world, the unions would be vocal advocates of this movement and have a significant place at the table in working together towards solutions. So my question to the moderators really are, have you reached out to the Marina Union? If so, what was the response? And if not, will you for one of the future sessions? Thank you.
So you broke up a little bit. I heard, would you reach out to the union, but I couldn't hear which union specifically. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that last piece of the question?
Sure, the Marina Police Union.
Right. We have not specifically reached out to the Marina Police Union. But
So
it's definitely-
Brian, I think it's a good idea to reach out to the men and women, that do the hard work day in and day out in our city. I can tell you, I did talk about it briefly. When any of these policy issues happen, not just the hot button policy issues, but any of these policy issues happen, I reach out to my POA so we can talk about it, because I might not have the brightest idea, or I don't realize about something. I get that. So we do have the discussion. I meet monthly with my POA board, the executive board, to talk about issues that's going on with them and the officers. I can't tell you lately, it's been mostly about COVID and the well-being of their families and making sure that the city's taking care of them. It's very stressful. One of the things that's going on, I think if you guys did reach out to the POAs, is that there's a lot of discussion about the wellness of officers. Well, officers suffer, I think it's 3 times more likely to commit suicide than the general public. It's something times more likely to get PTSD. And all officers, if you get any time on, deal with very traumatic stuff, and they see very traumatic stuff that the general public doesn't normally see. So we have a high number of psychological things that happen with officers. And so I'm a big advocate that, cities should create good wellness programs for their officers. And I believe, we don't do it now, but maybe, on a statewide level, that we should probably look at officers and reevaluate them after so many years to make sure they're not suffering from some psychological break, or, something's happened that they're not getting treatment for. And if they shouldn't be police officers, then just like our military, then, we should retrain them and use them somewhere else in our cities. Because it does lead to tragedies like George Floyd.
Thank you. Okay, let me see. I think we answered. There was one other question. 1 second. You've covered that already. Okay. All right. We can continue. Thank you.
Is that me? I can continue?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
The next thing I want to talk about is that the transformational change program. And many people don't know about it, because I went to city council and I talked about it once, and then we didn't talk about it again. And I was just notified in city council it was something that we were doing. So again, I'm a big advocate of training and, working with officers to make them the future leaders. I believe in all of that. And so developing my people, because I think people are good at heart, and you just sometimes need to guide them in the right way. So when I first joined Marina Police Department, it'll be 3 years in September, believe it or not. I had a person that worked for me, Aaron Weiner, who was working on his PhD. And I found that very exciting that Aaron was working on his PhD, getting his doctorate. And we started talking, and I said, hey, Aaron, would you be interested in doing a project on Marina? Because I really need to know where they're at. What are our deficiencies? I need somebody to take a hard look at the police department itself and where we are. And about leadership, because there was a lot of dysfunction, in my opinion, in the board. I'm not saying anything the board doesn't already know, that I felt there was dysfunction on the department, and that we needed to work better as a team. Because I believe that if you can't treat each other right, how are we expect the officer to treat the public right? So we got to clean up our own house to do a better job for the public. And so he agreed to it. But then what happened is, and again, I can share this, I'm not violating HIPAA, because Aaron said I can share this with whoever. Aaron had a relapse of cancer. And so Aaron is a survivor, and he had to, take some time off to deal with that and get treatment. And he's in relapse again, so that's a good thing. But it kind of put the project off for a year. So when he finally, after a year of his treatments and stuff, he came back, and we kind of dusted the project off and started it. So what we did is we took a small group, and again, because he's working on his PhD, it's very, for all you PhD candidates, councilwoman, and those who are out there that have their PhDs, you have to look at a very scientific, systematic, whether it's quantitative or qualitative approach to what your study is. So we put together this work group, which included the POA, cross-section of the representation of our department, to include our professional staff, supervisors. And we used the 5 dysfunctions of a team as the starting point. We bought the book for everybody, and I ended up getting it for the whole department because there was people going, I want to read that, once we started talking about it. So we used that book as a roadmap because it's set up in a way, there's already templates to use it as a roadmap to deal with dysfunctional teams. And we had to take a hard look at ourselves. And there was things that we didn't like about each other. And there was things that we were doing that were very dysfunctional as a police department because we're human. And so, one of them was trust, right? You don't have trust. How can you have trust in your community if we don't even have trust with each other in our agency? And that's the foundation in the 5 dysfunctions. If you've read that book, is starting with trust. Another big one we had was communication. We weren't communicating as well as we thought we could. And so from this work team, we came up with some strategic goals and started working on these goals. Now, this is literally a 2-year project at this point. We're 2 years into this now. So now we no longer talk about the 5 dysfunctions, but we flipped it around and talked about the 5 functions of an effective team. And we have posters around the department, and we have these conversations. And sometimes with my open door policy, I kick myself for, agreeing to the communication piece because I'm tired, but then I have to say, no, I'm committed to this. I may not like what they're telling me, but I got to listen. And, and then making that commitment to the community. So, let me give you the end of the story. The good thing is that there is a lot of people right now. If you read the news about the police, there's things going on in different agencies, not Marina, where the cops don't seem to be happy. Marina right now, I can't say that 3 years ago, but Marina right now is a pretty happy place for police officers. We have other officers saying, I think I'd like to join the Marina team. That's always a good thing for police departments. And, the other good thing is I've had a number of people saying, hey, Chief, when you first came here, I didn't know about you. I didn't think I was going to like you, but, you turned out to be okay. Hey, that's a win for me that I get just the okay. I'm good with that when it comes to cops because they're tough. They're a tough crowd. So we're moving in that direction, but it doesn't mean we're there because, now we have to look at, the thing about it is, hey, okay, we've gotten to this point. So what's the next step for our thing? And that's something I'm working with the executive team and with Aaron to say, what's our next steps? And maybe that's the community piece of it. I do know that Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton, when she was listening to when we presented to the council, said, hey, maybe this is something the whole city could do. I don't know. It's worked for our PD. I'm not saying the city needs it. That's not what I'm saying. So in case Lane's listening, I love our city. But it's worked for our police department. And again, this is the work of somebody. We didn't pay extra money to bring this consultant in because Aaron already worked for me. So, I gave him time to do this in addition, and made him do his other job too, which is training stuff.
So when you talk about this transitional leadership, and we're talking
transformational.
I'm sorry.
Transformational.
Thank you. Transformational leadership. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, for sure. Not transitional. Transformational leadership. And we talk about it within our community. What role does inclusion and diversity have in this? And anything around illicit biases or unconscious biases that we can, the way the police department looks at them and tries to address them. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, for me, the next step for our department is really to sit down with work groups or sit down and send out surveys. And we've done some small surveys, but maybe larger surveys to say, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What changes do you want to see the police department make? And realistic changes, right? Because if we could do these things and the community's okay with what the police department is and the morale's good on the police department, then we can always recruit from the community. I like recruiting from the community. I believe in diversity because if I didn't, I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't be a chief of police. That's what I always tell people, right? Even now, if you Google female police chiefs, there's very few that look like Tina Nieto. And you're probably wondering, what does that mean? It means absolutely beautiful and stunning. But I'm talking about, short female Hispanics, more Rubenesque, because that is just part of, I look back at my sisters. So there's not a lot of us, but we try really hard because I've had questions about, recruitment and stuff. And I try to recruit from our community because, you know, if you get people that are from your community, I think they just, whether you train them or not, I think for the most part, they treat people better because that's their family they're dealing with, or a friend of their family, especially a small community like ours. Everybody knows each other, and I'm going to hear about it, or, you know, somebody's going to hear about it. But I think it doesn't become an us and them because everybody's you, right? Because it's a family thing. So there are some difficulties, though. You know, Congressman Panetta was talking about. There's some systemic racism that makes it a little harder to recruit people when it comes to minorities and stuff. And it has to do with education, or just, you know, teaching them financial responsibilities. You know, if you grow up in a poor household, you know, nobody teaches you how to balance a checkbook. I say that because I grew up. I was a poor kid. Grew up in a large Hispanic family. I was very lucky that my mom and dad were together. You know, my mom, when I became a latchkey kid when I was younger, because my mom had to go back to work, and she worked in a factory, piecemeal factory. She worked on a line doing plastic, putting things together, making minimum wage to help put food on the table. My dad was a bartender. I mean, when you talk about systemic racism, when we moved to West Covina, I was 8 years old. We were only the second Hispanic family to move to this neighborhood. My dad drove this old blue beat up Chevy. I don't know if for those who are old, you might remember they had those vinyl tops on the cars. Well, our car was so old, the vinyl had been ripped off and there was just rust marks. And my dad got stopped, and I'm not kidding you, every night for like the first month we were there by every cop in West Covina, just because he was driving the speed up old car. Till they got to know that he lived, you know, in the community. Then I guess it was okay. You know, we had notes in our door, you know, saying, "Oh, why do you have so many kids?" or whatever. And, you know, we didn't know. We just thought it's because we were Catholic. But
so how has that influenced the way in which you are leading our department?
Well, it's influenced everything that I've done in my adult life. You know, just how I see the world, about fairness and trying to be as fair as I can be, and realizing that I have my own illicit biases. You know, I hear people talk about the Stanford study. You know, you should test for that. Guys, that Stanford study's been around for 20 years, and I had already done the testing 20 years ago, you know, when the books Blank and all those came out. So you're just, for those who are hearing about it, you're just getting on board with stuff. But recognizing that everybody has illicit biases. It doesn't matter what kind of family you grew up in, you have certain biases. The thing is that you have to identify that you do have these biases, and then just how do you deal with the biases? Because you don't know what you don't know. That's what I always tell people. You don't know what you don't know. So it's one, recognizing that the bias is there, and you know, then doing something about it in a positive way if it's a bad bias, because not all biases are bad. It's just the value that you place on whatever that bias is. Because, for example, bias, you know, might be for vanilla ice cream. That's a bias or preference. But we have to look at those biases that might be principally based, and then work on those if they're, you know, something bad for the community.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'm sensitive to time and to supporting you in maintaining your relationships. So there's right now 2 more questions. And so we have I'm not sure who it's from. It says, what data is available regarding the number of traffic stops, shooting by police, diversity of the police officers, and race of those arrested, etc.? What data is available? Can you?
Well, we do an annual, we don't put it out. Again, this is stuff we could do if the community wants us to do it. It's going to cost money, though, because you can't just hit a button and all this data is collected. So we either have to buy systems that collect this data, or we have to pay somebody to manually look for it. But we do put it out in an annual report every year that shows, we don't show the ethnicity of our officers. I certainly can give a report to the council and put it up somewhere. But it shows traffic stops. And we work with Monterey County, and so it's harder to get some of the data because we don't control dispatch right here in the city of Marina for some of that stuff. The racial profiling data, again, by 2022, that'll be up on the state pages. Again, that's in order to collect that data, you have to buy systems to do it, to get it up, and that's thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. I worked with the city of LA when we first started doing that under the consent decree, and the city spent lots and lots of money, right, for a big city like that, to be able to collect all that data. But the profiling data, it's going to be mandated to do that. Again, our TrackNet, which is our CAD system, computer system that we use to collect data, will be reporting that, and we're going to be mandated to report that to the state. Let me see, what was the other part of that question, Lisa?
Let me get it. Hold on.
Diversity, traffic stops.
Oh, 1 second. I'm sorry. Let me get back to it.
Police shooting.
Diversity of the police officers, race of those arrested, and regarding numbers of traffic stops shooting by police.
Okay. So that'll the race, the traffic stops, that'll all be reported under the profiling data by 2022 in the city of Marina. It's already, and it'll be on the state webpage. The state's mandating that, and the state's going to be putting out all that data.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. And then we have another question. This one is from Kathy Biala. Kathy, go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. Tina, I just cannot thank you enough for your very personal sharing. Every time I have heard you talk, whether it's in session at council or the town hall or in forums like this, I get to know you so well, and so I thank you for your candid personal sharing. It's just wonderful. Thank you for talking so much about all the specifics, but I must have missed the council when you talked about this transformational leadership. I am very impressed by that, and I'm going to go out and buy that book. I have not read that, so you'll have to send me the author of that. But I have a question that may be a little difficult. You know, we've been talking specifically about the police department, but at the national level, of course, you know, we're all speaking about systemic or institutional racism. And I just wanted to get your idea about how the police department, as a department of the whole local government system, how you see the issue of institutional or systemic racism could be a part of the whole system. So, you know, like I'm having a hard time kind of encapsulating my idea, but let's say an issue arises within the department. You handle it in a certain way, and let's say with your transformational leadership principles, but you are embedded in a larger system. So how could the system then thwart or support your initiatives to counter systemic racism? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Kathy. You know, this is a much deeper conversation. You know, it really is up to the voters on, you know, when they go to the polls and who do they elect, right? Who's going to represent them, and do you feel, you know, are we reflective? Is our leadership reflective of what is made up of our community? And so again, that's for the voters to decide. Because when you're dealing with systemic racism, it's about the whole system. So if you don't, and I'll give you an example, Kathy, something else you're going to find out about me. When I did my master's program, I did my paper on mentoring underrepresented groups in large police departments or in large law enforcement agencies. Surprise, I worked for the LAPD at that time, and, you know, there weren't a lot of, you know, me's at that higher level. So, you know, on a practical level, the people that empower need to mentor, you know, a cross section of people to come into these positions later, because it's not that people aren't capable to do it, but nobody's walked them through the system. So I'm a strong believer of mentoring and believing in the whole system of mentoring. So you got to create people that can get them to a certain level so they can at least compete, because all the studies shown, if you can get these underrepresented groups to that middle level, that they do fine at the upper levels. But it's just bringing the group here to that middle level in order for them to take over as, you know, in charge of things. And, you know, it's throughout our whole society. If you look at who the CEOs are, right? White males. That's not what the whole country is anymore. So, you know, we need to make sure that we provide education, that, you know, that we're investing in our youth, that we're creating, you know, youth councils and mentor them to be the future leaders of tomorrow. They're already leaders today, in my opinion, because they're the ones out that you see out, you know, raising awareness in a lot of these issues that we have ignored forever, you know, in our society. So, you know, kudos to all those young leaders out there that are doing that. And that'll make, to me, will make the world a better place tomorrow. And we're just going through turmoil now. So it's the voters, it's the community to make sure, you know, that's done. And then, you know, you can always, as a community, set certain standards and say, this is what we're going to do. I do not believe in giving people jobs or promoting people just based on X, Y, or Z, right? I think you should never do that. I think it's destructive to the people below them that may be X, Y, and Z. Because if that person fails and you don't set them up for success, then the other group that's oppressing that group says, see how they are, we shouldn't have done that. And then you're oppressed again for another, you know, 10 years. You know, LAPD, when I became a captain, when I made captain, command staff, somebody looked at me, and this is true, I'm in the history books, they said, you know, you're the first female Hispanic to make captain in the 140-year history of the LAPD when I made it. And that was sad, because LAPD was mostly Hispanics. We were the majority. It's since changed, and there's people, you know, that have come up behind me, which is why I got involved with the Hispanic Command Officers Association on a national level and stuff to put your money where your mouth is, I guess. And I believe in putting your money where your mouth is. So those are some of the ways that I see how we can work on it, but I don't have the end-all answer for you, Kathy. So.
Thank you so much for that candid answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any more questions at the moment from the public, so I'm going to bring us back. And okay, Tina. So as you know, hold on one second. We are seeing at the end screen. Okay, there we go. So hold on, why are we? Kathy, I'm gonna, hold on, there we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you. So Tina, as you know, this is the first of a 3-part series where our next event will be with a member, or actually 2 members, I believe, from NACOL, the National Coalition of Committee for Oversight of Law Enforcement. And then our 3rd session will be where we're looking at what are possible models for community oversight, and is it even something that we want to have here in Marina? It's an open discussion to the public, although the recommendations will be from the Marina Democratic Club, and I'm hoping you'll join us for that conversation. So keeping that in mind, is there anything you'd like to close with for this evening? Anything that you think we should be thinking about in advance of the next conversation?
Well, you know, one, I want to thank everybody for inviting me here tonight to have this conversation. And my door is always open. You know, you can email me at tnieto@cityofmarina.org, or you can call me or text me. I think everybody has my phone number. I'm not going to put it up because I'm not quite sure who's on this line, but you know, once you text me, they'll probably send you my phone number or email me. And if you want to have a one-on-one conversation, we'll have it. I try to get everybody who emails me or asks me questions, I try to get back to them. There's a lot of questions going on right now, though, obviously, with everything that's happening in our nation. What I can tell you is that you got a great group of men and women on the Marina Police Department that are working for you. It's not me, Tina, the chief. It is those young men and women day in and day out that are doing the hard work. They're out at morning watch. I'm sleeping at 2 in the morning, and they're keeping their city safe. And I trust them to keep their city safe. And if they're not doing what you expect them to do, let me know, because we will make the changes or correct them. And I don't think they're on the line, but I just got one that I wasn't happy with what the officers did, and Commander Anderson just dealt with it last night and briefed me this morning on how he dealt with what the officers were doing. It wasn't criminal or anything. It was just perception, and I wanted to make sure that they weren't even violating that. So and I'm not violating any crowbar rights. I do think that, you know, you guys can make changes. I guess, you know, I like Congressman Panetta, but I don't have as much faith in our federal government as he does. You know, he's part of it, and I get it. But I do think on a local level and a state level that we can make some of the changes that our community is demanding. But again, those changes have to be very systematic. They have to be strategic. They can't be knee-jerk reactions. And you have to listen to all voices, even the voices you may not agree with, because not everybody agrees with how I see the world. But we need to listen to each other. So again, thank you for inviting me out here tonight, and I'll join you on the next one. So I look forward to see what work comes out of this series.
Thank you. Okay, and actually, I'm sorry, our Mayor Pro Tem Morton, I think, wanted to just make one comment before David is going to take us away and wrap it up.
Oh, hi, Gail. I don't have everybody up, so I didn't know she was on.
Well, let's see. Whoop, where'd you go? We lost you, Gail. 1 second.
We'll go to galley view.
There you go. Gail, did you want to say something?
Yes, I had to find the unmute key that you just gave me. So I just wanted to also thank our Chief Nieto, and as a member of City Council, we truly try to support our police department. Our police department, we are very proud of it, supports us as a city, all of us, all of our residents, and I think is doing a good job about that. Strategic and systematic change is, I think, the only way that you can plan correctly and address the needs of what your city needs and anticipate what you need next, and to make any corrective action. And as a council, we're constantly trying to find the budget, the means to support the police with what they need, not only for policing, but for the training that our police officers require, and also is looking for making each of them a better officer and a better individual and part of this significant team. Thank you, Tina. You've brought great leadership to our police department in the last 3 years, and it has been a successful change in the morale of your officers, as you said, but also engendered trust all around, I think. So thank you. Great job.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. Okay, David, take it away. Thank you, everyone. Here's David.
Okay, so let me also add my own personal congratulations and thank you, big thank you to Chief Nieto for attending tonight's meeting. I think your insights into the role and the activities of the police have been very helpful, especially for me in understanding how our city is policed and what are our responsibilities as citizens to interact, with the police. And I want to just thank you again for sharing, your own personal stories and histories on tonight's meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
And then for everyone who has registered, you'll get a copy of this video and you'll get information for when our next event is. So thank you, everyone. We will see you soon at our next event. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.